Ladies and gentlemen, and aviation aficionados, welcome back to another episode of The Bagfather.
A special guest today.
Very special.
We're going to talk about security. The nightmare we all experience on every single airport.
A lot of these things that are front and center at airports, at least in the United States, so I'm curious to hear what's being done behind the scenes.
With us is Matt Vaughan. He is responsible for the IATA security, and he's in the leadership team for aviation, cyber, and security. And Matt, a very welcome to the Bagfather.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Looking forward to the discussion and the degree on how far we can take this.
Yeah, I think it's good to explain a little bit what IATA is, and then we follow up with what your role is within IATA.
Yeah, thanks. So IATA is an 80-year-old trade association, and we basically represent over 300 airlines of the world in terms of regulatory and aviation policy. And then on top of that, we run a international safety audit program, which has over 420 airlines registered to that program. So when you put that into statistical context, it represents roughly about 86% of today's scheduled aviation traffic.
And I think it's interesting because I have dealt with the baggage working group from IATA many times. So I know how procedures and regulations and resolutions are being... It's typically run by the members, right?
That's correct. We are, on record at least, a consensus-based organization. We take direct sort of influence from the ICAO structures and the ICAO Council in the way that they govern standards and recommended practices at the Chicago Convention level. As a trade association, we have US dollar immunity from anti-trade practice type activity, so we are able to bring a bunch of otherwise competitive airlines and different parts of the industry together, do that in a way that provides them immunity, and ultimately arrive at standards and recommended practices that optimize operations, keep it safe, secure, and of course keep it cost effective as best as possible.
When I look at an airport, cost effective is not the first thing that comes in mind when it comes to baggage handling. A lot of square meters are being used for baggage handling. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that differs around the world and in different regions? Because I think it's one of the roles of IATA to at least ensure some kind of uniformity.
Yeah, that's right. So the safety audit program, so I just mentioned IOSA, there's another ground audit program, otherwise known as ISAGO, which is a voluntary-based audit program. So it's not linked to the IATA membership, so organizations can volunteer to be part of that. Through those standards, the holy grail, if you like, or the mission is to unify as best you can in terms of handling below wing practices. But no doubt there are variations in different parts of the world. All the different operational economic considerations that make up just how complex individual airport ecosystems can be. Notwithstanding the subject of security, which adds 100% adds an additional level of complexity. And, it's really timely that we're having this conversation. We are in the process of trying to lead some hold baggage security reform that is ultimately trying to strike a balance between, national security priorities, which we absolutely understand and, need to do what we can, but equally find measures and processes that sustain operational and economic viability of this type of transport, right? And I'll be first to admit it's arguable to sort of say that anything has actually tangibly improved in terms of hold baggage security since the explosive detection standard in 2006, when that became an international requirement.
So can I ask, when we're talking about all the different things that are in place from IATA, what are you trying to prevent? Are we talking about bad actors at an airport? Are we talking cyber security attacks? What all is covered under your purveyance there?
Yeah, so that's probably a good clarification. So IATA, we basically work on the implementation strategies for ICAO-related standards and recommended practices, right? So we don't create security rules on behalf of other agencies, and then of course you have national agencies which go above the ICAO baseline, right? So our role is really to moderate, but hopefully based on risk, and certainly that's not always the case. But our role is to try and find those sensibilities, what I often call the Goldilocks principle, right? It's the sweet spot between, maintaining protective security, which we all know what those arguments are, but also understanding that aviation is a massive economic contributor to GDP, to any one single economy, and so you have to do what you can to find that middle ground.
Let's go back in time a little bit. Remember the Lockerbie disaster. I read the book. It's phenomenal, and especially what they found out afterwards. And this little cassette player that was being used and basically prepared in baggage. I think, but that's an assumption, that we are pretty safe now, right? Since that happened, we are not going to let that happen again.
That's absolutely the working theory. We are safe in the sense that controls, measures, if you like, have dramatically changed since 1988. And you only need to look at the Sydney event on Etihad Airways in July 2017, and that involved no insider. So that was an external actor attempting to use the baggage acceptance process. The bag was oversized, so they knew that there's a security posture difference between inline screening and offline, and if it wasn't for the sake that the airline adheres to excess baggage fee collection, there may well be a different result. So, and that particular device was only 10 grams heavier than the one used at Lockerbie. So the actors are very well aware that there is a sweet spot in terms of detection versus actually carrying out the heinous sort of crimes attached to that.
So there's been these things that have transpired over the last couple of decades that we can use as examples of bad actors. So is the work that IATA is doing all in response to that, or is there any context around what could potentially happen and trying to, project what's coming?
That's a great point. So we try not to be reactive. So the system's resilient, as just commented, right? It's safe, it's resilient. It's not the same every day, so no one believes that it's 100% foolproof, right? And nor should it be, because if that was the case, you'd have one flight a day departing. So that's just not possible, right? So there is a trade-off, there is a middle ground there. But what has changed though is that there are some parts of the world that have invested considerably in terms of the technology, the automation, which we're now seeing, obviously post-COVID. Above wing, below wing security operations are starting to align a lot closer. So there is some optimization between the way you screen cabin bags versus hold bags, and even bags that are accepted at the gate put into hold 5. The variations of security are no longer what they were, even 10, 15 years ago. So, but having said that, just completed a series of multilateral government meetings here in Switzerland, and there is still a reticence, there is still a legacy thinking around baggage reconciliation as a primary security measure. And no matter how many times, and certainly we do, that's our role in IATA, is to find reason and to continue to look for rationalization. There are some governments that cannot possibly walk away from the heritage that Air India in 86, Lockerbie in 88, continues today to institutionally influence the way they think about hold baggage security handling.
And that's an interesting aspect, because what we learned in 2020 with the huge baggage disruptions, disruption became seeable from the outside. The whole thinking for the bad actors has been changed, in my opinion. How did IATA anticipate on that? How did you anticipate in that ruling? Because if you want to do something bad, disruption and getting the attention is the first thing.
We publish both public material and of course restricted within industry. Most airline security managers are nationally security cleared anyway, so they get a very good sense of what actors are thinking and the methods and things like that. The old adage really applies. The less intelligent your system is, the higher security defense you have, right? And it's arguable that some baggage management systems are still using old source coding, which therefore gives them a natural defense against the type of digital threats that are out there today. So, but again, to go back to that original point, explosives in hold baggage is the principal security concern. And all the measures that you see and experience today are focused on that explosive type detection. The TSA in the US, just to give it some context, had a successful detection last April out of a what you would describe a tier 2, tier 3 regional airport. I think it was somewhere in Pennsylvania. And this individual had created a device that was extremely dangerous. And TSA detection caught that. And that was for a domestic flight. So there are variations in the way you do domestic handling. Naturally, everyone will know, between international and domestic. And in the context of the US, they apply international standards domestically. And in this case, successful detection, and that particular individual is in custody for life.
Wow, it's fascinating. Jen and I spoke with the TSA, was one of our guests in one of our shows. I personally had the opportunity to go to the TSA museum and had a little tour, and understand what is going on and what people try to bring aboard. It's crazy. Yeah. But today it requires a lot more thinking. And the example you just gave about April, it gave me goosebumps, actually. Yeah. And now I will be waiting in line and go through all the security measuring. And I know that it's still necessary.
It certainly is. To go back to your point, the international threat context is different, but it's no less, unfortunately, tragically, right? And so the variety of actors are different. The motivations are slightly different than what perhaps 20 years ago with what was experienced with 9/11 and of course the tragedies that took place thereafter. But again, equally, aviation is operating at an optimized point where it is safe. You do need to continue daily, monthly type risk assessment activity. You need to change your intensity on that risk assessment activity based on information. And one of the things that we always teach in terms of risk management is that there's infinitely less that is knowable than you could possibly know. That is your starting point. And as long as an organization you have a healthy need for wanting to know what you don't know, you're off to a very good start.
I have a question going back. For many years, it seems a lot of baggage incoming to the United States, even though it's been screened in the country that it was departing from, still required additional screening when it got to the States. Has there been any advancements in getting countries more leveled as to the security requirements so that it's a one process and not having to redo it again? at the arriving terminals.
The US, I'll admit, is a bit of an outlier in terms of hold baggage security handling. That's for sure. And what makes the US slightly more complicated is there's more than just one agency responsible for detection of certain things, right? So that the US has a very strong nuclear, civil and military nuclear waste type detection program. So even if you were to achieve an aviation security variation on bags coming in, you're still going to need to work with another agency for their screening and detection requirements for nuclear materials, right? And then add agriculture and medical and a whole range of other things. So what I can say at least is the TSA is up until a couple of days ago, in terms of its leadership and so on, it is actively piloting or is attempting to look at locations where they could potentially create a trusted corridor or a bonded corridor, if you like, so that you could perhaps fly from London into JFK and go gate to gate without needing pre-clearance at the point of uplift. I was the English liaison back in 2011, 2012 for Abu Dhabi. A couple of different agencies on the UAE side and of course the US side. So I got a really good chance, really good read in on the American appetite, if you like, for the way screening requirements, and the further upstream that you can recognize, the better the system, of course.
And I'm very keen on this part of the process. I know there are some pilots going on and stuff is being tested. But I think it's also necessary because the volume of passengers and the number of bags that come in requires smart. We cannot screen them all anymore at one single funnel.
100%.
Let's say if you go to Orlando and you have a stopover from Europe and you also go to a cruise ship, there are 4 or 5 screening moments. Besides the costs, I think it's also unnecessary because you have that corridor. Do you see any developments on knowing the passenger growth? Do you see any developments on anticipating on that? Because things are changing rapidly.
Yes and no. The short answer is yes and no. I made a point, 2025, I will never mention the C word of 2020 again, so I'm not going to do that. But coming out of what took place, governments have reprioritized, and this was one of those things that we advocated. We 100% support what you universally refer to as one-stop security. But the truth is, it needs to be a ground-up phenomena, right? Operators of industry need to continue to make the economic and the optimization arguments. Governments are just not, transport ministries at least, are just not going to put it on their list of priority because it does represent a drawdown from what they know as just the international baseline, right? It's also not for everyone, purely because of the infrastructure costs and changes that are required. But if you're able to achieve this at a master planning level, which some of the states in the Middle East are doing right now, they are master planning at 7 to 10 years from now. And they're absolutely planning on the basis that regulatory reform has taken place and that you will be able to do tail-to-tail, gate-to-gate transfer, and the provisions will be in place. Now, that's going to take a bit of work from airport, airline, the whole ecosystem to lobby and advocate to get these governments to see the value in this.
That's Jan's job. She does that on a daily basis.
Yeah. But like I said, it is bottom up, right? It's going to require sort of grassroots efforts on convincing transport ministers you need to sign these agreements.
Yeah, but they see the bottlenecks, right?
They should, but the problem we see, though, unfortunately, is the security argument, right? Because you are essentially handing sovereignty of your territory to another state, so that anything that sort of flies over your territory and XYZ takes place as it's leaving your territory, you're accountable for that. And so there's very few transport ministers that are ready to clearly take on those variations in front of the international community.
That's interesting, because being able to do some of those pre-clearances would certainly allow airlines to turn aircraft faster and all of the things. So I'm sure there's a high level of interest for that to transpire, but you have to balance it with the security requirements.
Yeah, I wear the T-shirt for pre-clearance, so I have no problem supporting and talking it up. But let me tell you, there are other parts of government and industry that stay away from pre-clearance, right? And it just happens to be a US model, and of course it costs, aeronautical fees wise, it's 3 times the normal, 4 times even normal handling, right? So there are naturally arguments for and against, but for those states that can agree to that, it's a really excellent facilitation program for being able to transit into the US and operate in an effective way.
For example, Schiphol Airport, very simple. They run out of capacity because the baggage system is let's say a couple of dozen flights a day, and you have stopovers in the US. Then it becomes really complex. So I think new technologies should be implemented to overcome this kind of problems. What kind of technologies do you see are very promising when it comes to this kind of solutions?
So the sort of the go-to one, if you like, is of course the whole digital identity argument. And if you are able to, and let's leave the privacy and the data security thing to the side for the moment, because that's probably another podcast altogether. But if you're able to get five out of 10 travelers on a digital framework, where you are able to do the clearances, that's more than just passenger PNR and API, right? I'm talking like true upstream digital identity clearances. The Netherlands and Canada pre-COVID were already trialing what they called a passport-free corridor. So the idea of you having to travel with this hard copy document, they were already trialing this between Amsterdam and Toronto on how what would that actually look like. That's from a seamless point of view, right? Touchless, curb to aircraft, cabin seat without sort of being molested, if you like. So that was kind of the customer experience priority. But equally, there were very good security advantages that could be created from that. Generically, they just call it differentiated screening, right?
Personally, I have mixed emotions by implementing that kind of technology, because it also requires behavioral change. But I also see a lot of failures of the technology. Yeah, when we bring it to baggage, we are dealing with baggage technology that's at least 45 years old, including screening technology. Although we see a lot of new developments, and I know that some of the conveyors and the OEM software that's on that specific system very vulnerable. Turns out that it's mid-90s equipment. So a lot of modernization needs to happen. And if you would put that in regions, you can oversee the whole world. So is Europe ahead of the curve, or are we lagging behind, or what do you see?
The kiosk, the self-service arrangements, the self-baggage drop-off, there are clearly airlines and airports that are working together to get that to a point where you can, ensure that sort of transfer from the land side to the air side is as seamless as possible. So, short answer is, Europe is leading some of those innovations. There are still hang-ups, though, in terms of automatic bag drop, for example. Okay, so it's great. Amsterdam has approved the use of, facial recognition, no problem. But those airlines that are enabled that, they need to request that variation from the Americans, right? That's just not a said, carte blanche, you can do what you need to do. So it is still piecemeal at the moment in terms of the implementation. And as you said, for those that can tolerate the capital and operational costs, and tolerate the variations in operating this equipment without knocking that on to passengers and therefore pricing yourself out of certain routes, right?
And also with the introduction of any of these newer technologies or ways to process passengers and baggage, you're introducing new vulnerabilities also. So, you put a kiosk in place and it's not operating all by itself. So what's happening behind the scenes for the hardening of those software connections?
Largely it's supplier or vendor based, if I can use that word. I know some people think that's a little derogatory. Let's say partners. Let's do that. So give you a sort of bird's eye view of cybersecurity in terms of aviation at the moment. We are as strong as our supply chain. The supply chain itself is actually taking the bulk of digital standardization within our system. So by the time an airline or an airport actually buys the kit, it comes with a sticker on the side of it that says, yeah, look, that's been designed and implemented, and cybersecurity wasn't an option. So, it costs what it costs, and there was no sort of like, well, if, it'd cost this if you leave cybersecurity to the side, right? That's kind of a big deal because there are plenty of sectors out there that have cybersecurity as an option, right? You don't actually need to have these features built into your tech. So, and as I said before, the less automated and the less source coding that you have, the more secure the systems are.
Yeah, and now with the advent of these huge databases, you have even airports within the last couple of years being attacked with ransomware through HVAC systems or, similar systems to baggage where it just opens up the vulnerabilities and they find their ways in.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the whole cybersecurity enterprise is very much a different business model, if I can even use those words without diminishing anyone that's been a victim to this stuff. But yeah, it's another universal economy on its own.
Next week, I get to talk with Seattle Airport, who they have been, the ransomware attack. I think that was second quarter of last year. So they're just kind of in recovery mode now and, moving forward with ways of hardening their systems to keep bad people out.
Bringing in more equipment brings on another topic, which is on many agendas, sustainability. That's an interesting element here because I hear you talking about what needs to be implemented. What's the agenda of IATA on that one?
What I can say confidently is there is an agenda. What the details are is a moving target. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, a lot of that advocacy is very public anyway, right? So if anyone really wanted to see what the sort of detail was, it's very much online. But the majority of the effort is around the whole fuel, fossil fuels, and there are pockets of efforts, cabin waste and hold waste and things like that, but nothing to the degree that the optimization of finding alternative energy is, that's kind of the effort. But when you look at that in terms of international agreements, yeah, perhaps not in our lifetime, right? It's another challenge.
I have my own philosophy on what the impact is for baggage. I can see a lot of opportunity over there. Let's talk a little bit about the passenger, because we are talking about the industry, we are talking about all the aspects, but what are the immediate changes that we can implement for passengers that will have a huge effect? What kind of ideas do you have? How can passengers help on your mission, on the IATA's mission?
So if we kind of look at a current phenomena, which is this, for whatever reason, people get into the cabin of an aircraft and just completely lose their minds. Is it alcohol or illegal substances? And then try and open the L4 door, for example, right?
I need to be a little bit careful here. This is a British production company for this podcast, and the British tend to go on board at 7 in the morning on Schiphol Airport with 7 Guinness already consumed. So this is a good point. I see a lot of that kind of behavior,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to cabin baggage.
Yeah, very true.
They're
Yeah.
fighting for these little spots on the overhead luggage compartments. It causes a lot of frustration, but IATA should do something about that.
So we do what we can in terms of sort of the policy and the legal level. We're obviously not an operational agency, so we work with Interpol and various law enforcement agencies. And I guess the point I was really going to sort of drive home is that criminal deterrence or fear of prosecution used to be a deterrence. You drive your car down the road and you're doing 10 kilometers over the limit. You see the police car, you slow down, right? That actually used to work. And I don't know what's happened. People's behavior in a public space, especially inside a cabin at 30,000 feet, the fear of being prosecuted is just no longer a deterrence. And second to that is and to your earlier point around, what do customers or what do passengers need to be expecting? You can actually see if there is an event, the rest of the cabin is starting to respond. It's no longer cabin crew having to physically or verbally try to resolve the situation, right? There's plenty of, otherwise known as able-bodied passengers, which is the sort of industry language. There's plenty of people getting involved now that immediately by sheer volume is bringing the situation back to a point where a diversion is not needed. Obviously, in the worst case, diversions take place. But there was just one the other day in Perth, and she actually stabbed a police officer with a pencil in the neck.
No way.
Yeah, and luckily they were on the ground, and I'm watching that one closely from a prosecution point of view, and we're talking with Interpol on, is there a possibility of using the red notice or the green notices in terms of at least convictions, right? So if people are convicted for these kind of air-related, airspace type of crimes, offenses, shouldn't airlines and airports be able to actually cross-check that? Because is past behavior evidence of future behavior, right? So it's using that kind of risk management approach to mitigating. But again, you need to prosecute, and second, you need conformity or compliance because people need to be scared of being prosecuted. In terms of IATA's efforts, we're absolutely trying to continue to push for the criminalization of some of these events. But the drawback is, if you go too far, you'll cancel your flight and you'll need your crew for evidence collection, and that's 24 hours out of your operation. So it's a real balance.
I understand that it's a weighing a decision here. What happened to the blacklist?
So in terms of carrier management, that is an entirely individual thing. But in terms of counterterrorism watch list, that's a national security related thing. So we as IATA, we don't promote the use of the blacklist, and certainly not that word. We would call it a watch list. We don't offer guidance. There's no standards around why an organization would adopt that kind of thing. But again, it's using the methodology that if you have offended, you are known to have offended once, well, that increases your likelihood of having done it again because you weren't afraid of prosecution. And from some of the evidence that I've seen, that is absolutely the case.
Well, and for airlines to invite people back on board who are obviously potentially causing harm to crew, I understand why a list exists.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, they do exist, but it's not a universal thing. It's not an institutional thing that's being promoted.
It's actually a fairy tale, that it's only seen by low-cost carriers and people that fly once a month. Well, once a year. It goes also with full-service carriers, also in business class, everywhere. And me as a frequent flyer, I see a lot as well. And even with expectations from some people because they have a certain status in their flying, they just get rude. For me, it's just a matter of behaving yourself, and it's good that you mentioned that other people stand up as well to support the crew.
Well, I'm curious what Matt's, what do you enjoy the very most about everything that's under your charge right now?
The events that took place last year in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, by implications, that's a 3 in 10 years KPI. Three major events in 10 years, and two of them while I was the security director of airlines that were our members. So maybe I wouldn't phrase it in I enjoy, but the challenge is 100% there that this cannot happen again.
Really important pieces of work.
Yeah, and it's a combination of the implementation, no doubt. Not every day is the same. We don't get up and wake up and love each other the same way every day. Humans all get that. But equally, there are some standards. There are some just basic practices out there that I really get a little frustrated with, because I speak English. I'm privileged. I have English as my language. I can reason. I can rationalize. But we are really struggling in trying to get some of that knowledge and then push that out into other parts of the world where the words safety and security are not separated the same way we understand it, right? You have an intentional and you have an accidental. And in many cultures, that's just one word. And so when we talk about airspace security and safety management, they need to be, you need to approach it in two different concepts. Ultimately, you are attempting to risk manage the situation, no doubt, but you have to absolutely understand the security posture and the safety posture. So I do have a lot of work this year. The KPI is do not get shut down. Do not have another one of these tragic, totally unacceptable type events. And so in terms of enjoyment, I totally take that challenge on. I want to be part of seeing, the next 10 years, there was not a single event.
In order to become more transparent to the industry, it works two ways. Because I see passengers that are just frustrated and they don't believe the promise from the airline anymore. We need to regain their trust. On the other hand, we require passengers to do a little bit more to have a safe and a safe operation that's also comfortable and meeting the expectations of the passengers. How are we all, so not only IATA but everybody, regaining that trust?
I know exactly what you're saying. You start out with an airline customer at the beginning of the process. You then potentially lose that customer. They become a transaction through the middle, security, immigration, baggage acceptance, whatever, lounge access even. Like, wow, that's, getting into a lounge is harder to get into sometimes than, U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, for example, right? So it's just, it does, it raises those questions. And yet when you travel in off-peak periods, it's wonderful. Actually, probably spent the last couple of years deliberately trying to find those off-peak connections so that I can experience the system, potentially, 10, 20 years ago, because surge volume and the way that airlines are building their schedules, we all want to take off in the evening and land first thing in the morning, right? So, and then airspace is structured that way, of course, to match the departure banks. And then you've got the environmental arguments that are, then the noise and things like that are influencing the way airspace. So the sort of industry party line is what they call CDM, collaborative decision making. right? So that's the catchphrase, that's the party line. But the reality is, start treating each other like customers, and actually respect the fact that I've paid for a service. I've paid an amount, and if you're flying national carriers, you're paying a premium, right, to do that. And so therefore, this idea of service mentality, how do we bring that back in all the functions?
It's kind of disappeared a little bit as everything else, comes to be more important for the moment, like getting people to their destination alive. That's worth something.
I keep hearing aviation referred to as infrastructure. And yes, it is. It's infrastructure, but it's also an incredible privilege and a service. And if, in my case and many others, you've got families in other parts of the world, it's absolutely an emotional connection for your own existence. So, we certainly, it certainly feels like at times we've lost that kind of, this is really a privilege to be a part of. And whether you're a customer or a service agent, this whole idea of service is, we really need to potentially look at how we can bring that back.
Yeah, it's a completely different. I remember the days of going and everybody's dressed up to get on the plane, and now, if you get pajamas, that's at least good.
I have one last question for Matt. We have to let him go because otherwise it will say, I want to know what kind of guy you are.
Me?
I just want to know what kind of guy you are. I'm asking for a friend, by the way.
Okay.
Are you a carry-on or a check-in guy?
I'm a carry-on guy.
Why?
Because, I'll be perfectly honest, I've had too many lost baggage experiences, and we didn't kind of get into that, actually, so maybe we do a part 2, because I'd love to talk about the whole baggage handling at a technical level.
Me too. We can do a separate show.
And then the other piece is, maybe it's my service or my duty, but if the average sort of weight of a, I think it's 80 kilos, right? Every passenger and bag, you kind of calculate it. The trim is based on 80 kilos.
And that's actually interesting. Different airlines are using different measuring.
Okay. So I just do my part to reduce a bit of the footprint, right? So, and if I can land it, just go straight through to the Uber, then.
I'm curious, which airline are you using the most?
Air Canada, actually.
Air Canada.
Yeah.
It happens that we will be talking to Air Canada and we will be telling that you're not checking in the bags because you're basically not believing on them anymore. I thank you very much, Matt.
They know.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely.
You have a ton of expertise. We would love to have you back one day on the show, if that's possible. So that was Matt Vaughan.
So grateful to hear from him. I really hope we get to catch up with him again soon because I'd love to hear the rest of his opinions on checked baggage and all the fun that goes with that.
It also sounds that he has a lot of work to do.
Can you imagine what his day must be like trying to fix all of these issues worldwide?
Oh man, I was also in shock that they discovered something in April. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
And a lot of developments, so they're really thinking of it.
There is. And proof that some things are working. If they're catching things before we all know about it, at least it's all for something.
I want to do another show with this guy because he has a good story to tell.
Absolutely. We'll make it happen.
You can check out more episodes at thebagfather.com or by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to get in touch. Go to our website and tell us about your baggage-related experiences and mishaps. In the meantime, thank you for listening and join us next time for more baggage-related conversations with the Bagfather. This is a Fresh Air production brought to you by Baggage Media.